The incident happened in 2007. At the time, my friend Gunn and I were transferred to a new construction site in a small town. The two of us shared a dorm with a local named Key. In the evening, Gunn told a story about the woman. One night, the woman was passing through a cemetery because she wanted to go to the toilet. She stopped quickly. She panicked when she realized she was urinating on a grave. She went insane and bit her 4-year-old son to death when she got home. Many people in the village witnessed her story and they thought that she was haunted. I had always been fascinated by stories about gods and ghosts, and I was certain she was possessed by the ghost in the grave. At the same time, on the other side, Key laughed loudly. Key said that Gunn just made up the story. Gunn's story had not been verified by anyone. I also had a question. Gunn only heard from other people, so had he ever witnessed the story with his own eyes? Gunn heard Key saying what he said was made up to scare people. Gunn was a bit unwilling. Gunn scolded Key and challenged Key to tell a true ghost story. Key saw Gunn angry. Key was a little funny, so he asked Gunn if Gunn wanted to hear a true story. I paid attention to Key's voice. He appeared to be aware of something, so he stood up and told us. Key said that there were demons right here in the town. He stopped and said with a serious expression that someone raised ghosts in the town. I had never heard of it before. Gunn didn't believe Key's story and thought that Key was bragging. Key was excited after hearing Gunn say he was bragging. He said there was a pond west of the dam where there was a very strange guy with a ghost on his body. When Key finished talking, looking at our unbelievable expressions, he said he would take us to see the strange man at midnight. With the expectation of mysteries, we all eagerly waited until midnight to find out the truth of Key's story. At precisely 12 o'clock at night, the three of us went into the direction that Key had indicated to see if the man raising the ghost was real or not. The midnight weather was quite cold. "Hey, it hasn't come yet. Why is it taking so long? Are you on the wrong path?" asked Gunn impatiently. Key was a local and he knew the terrain well, so we didn't ask much. "Don't worry, we're almost there. In front of us," Key reassured. We took 2 turns in a narrow alley. The surrounding space was extremely quiet. The area had a lot of abandoned houses and they were waiting to be demolished. Key stopped and said, "You see, the guy is living in the dilapidated house over there." Key, seeing Gunn's bewildered expression, asked him if he was afraid, and if he was, it wasn't too late to return. Gunn tried to be brave. He continued to ask Key to lead the way. So we continued to approach the old house. When we reached the wall of the old house, Key stopped and told Gunn and I to stay behind him, signaling us to be quiet. The 3 of us leaned softly against the wall below the window. We couldn't hear anything inside. Key grabbed both hands on the window sill and stretched his head inside to look. Gunn and myself were also curious. We followed Key to the window to look inside. The light in the room was dim. There was no furniture in the house. There was only a musty smell. The smell mixed with a stench. There was a person in the room. He was sitting with his back towards us. The man just sat motionless and bowed his head. After bowing and sitting motionless for 7 or 8 minutes, all of a sudden the man started shaking his shoulders and he sobbed softly. The 3 of us were unsurprised. We only heard the man mumbling something very low. I thought the man might be mentally ill, so he sat around talking nonsense in the middle of the night. I was confused and turned to ask Key who was he talking to. Today was also the first time Key saw him. The guy lived alone. Maybe he was talking to a ghost, but we just didn't see the ghost. At the same time, Gunn suggested us to go around the opposite window so we could see the man's face. Key and I agreed with Gunn's approach. We were all driven by curiosity. Because many houses were demolished, we walked carefully to avoid making any noise. Key was the first to stand on the windowsill to look inside the house and the direction. Since the window was facing the front of the man, we were afraid of being discovered, so Key went up first to see who the man was actually talking to. Key glanced into the room, his body trembling as if he had seen something terrible, and he almost cried out. Key became terrified and withdrew from the window. Gunn and I hurriedly asked him what he saw, but Key just covered his mouth with both hands as if he was about to vomit. Key turned to cover his mouth and ran away. He started vomiting. When we saw Key running away, Gunn and I became even more curious. We couldn't contain our curiosity. Myself and Gunn climbed up the window. Then we saw a scene that we couldn't forget ever in our lifetimes. The man's shirt was opened. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. The man looked thin. He was holding chicken legs in his hand. And there was a face on his stomach. And the face was eating the chicken leg in his hand with its mouth. The face was making a rustling sound. We saw a few bloody animal carcasses still scattered on the ground. All of a sudden, the face on the man's stomach stopped chewing. His face looked at me and Gunn with blood-red eyes. He spotted us. We screamed and fell from the window. The horrible image made us dizzy. As we sat on the ground, we forgot the way back. "Catch them and don't let them run," a voice cried from within. The voice didn't belong to the man, so it could only have been from the face. I had never seen and thought that there would be such a strange thing in the world. Key was vomiting next to us. He immediately dragged me and Gunn away, and we ran back to the dorm without daring to look back. The next day, we told colleagues in the technical team about the story last night. Many people did not believe us, so they came to the old house again, but the house was empty. They only saw the corpses of many animals. There were some local people talking about the incident. They said the man had a strange lump on his stomach. Some others said he was possessed by demons. And at last, I still didn't know what he was. This is a true horror story that's well known in my hometown. At the time, there was a couple in my village who lived with their younger brother. One day, a man from the village dashed to their house and knocked on the door. The man was panicking, dashing inside and howled, "Dead! Your brother is dead!" The older brother was mortified, unable to believe what he had heard, and repeatedly asked the man to please correct himself. But this man insisted that his brother was hunting with him when he slipped and fell into a stream. The older brother and his wife were astounded to hear this. As a result, the two followed the man and hurried to the forest's edge to check on his brother's situation. When they arrived, they noticed that there were many people standing around. Everyone was talking about the accident. At the time, it was extremely difficult for the couple to get through the crowd to see how their brother was doing. On the spot, his brother was soaking wet, pale and motionless on the ground. But his eyes were still open and dreamy, staring at the couple as if clinging to life. When the couple noticed this, they rushed to assist their younger brother. The older brother pressed his ear to his brother's heartbeat hopelessly, seeing that he was still alive. Thinking that there was still a chance to save his life, the older brother and his wife brought him home. The house was now filled with the cries of the wife and the younger brother, who was now lying motionless on the bed. The couple's worry and grief were clearly visible on each person's face. All they had to do now was wait for him to take his last breath. However, a wheezing sound came from his mouth at that moment. The couple was taken aback by the expression. The couple had just turned to look at their brother when he sat up like a spring, but this time his face was very frightening and his eyes were lifeless. When the wife noticed that her brother was awake, she couldn't contain her joy and cried and called him, but he didn't answer and just sat with his back to the couple, looking very strange. Immediately after that, he crawled onto the bed and stood up awkwardly, squirming like a zombie. He walked like a child learning how to walk, his mouth still smiling with a devilish grin. But then he collapsed back on the bed. When the wife saw her brother like that, she assumed he had just drowned, so he was tired, dizzy, and couldn't stand. Concerned for his safety, she immediately ran to help him, but when she got close to him, she felt a cold from the younger brother's body. As soon as she touched his body, the younger brother turned to face his older brother and sister-in-law with a strange expression. He had a crazy smile on his face. His eyes were white and his irises were cloudy. He looked insane. After that, the younger brother jumped to the ground from the bed with all his legs and arms and ran out of the room as fast as an arrow. He dashed out, aiming for the door. The couple looked at him in surprise, not sure if it was because he was shocked by drowning and wondering where he could run to. Concerned about their brother, the couple decided to go out and find him. They both looked around the corner and called out their brother's name, but there was no response. After searching for a while, the husband discovered his brother in a garden corner performing a terrifying action. He sat in front of the chicken coop door before reaching inside and catching a large rooster. His next move surprised and shocked the couple. His mouth only smiled satisfiedly before he bared his teeth, grabbed the rooster hard and sucked its blood. Seeing his brother's scary expression, the couple rushed to hold him, but at the same time, he seemed to have become insane and difficult to control. When the husband noticed this, he stopped him, but he struggled, as if he wanted to get out. The husband, who was no longer strong enough to stop him, had to rely on his wife's assistance to bring him into the house. As if sensing something, the husband quickly wrapped a blanket around his body and tied him up with ropes. He hummed angrily like an animal, not saying anything. The wife suspected that their brother had gone insane after falling into the stream. When the wife discovered that her brother was behaving strangely, she was taken aback and questioned her husband, who showed a cold demeanor. Suddenly, the two were drawn to a strange phenomenon from their younger brother, which made them extremely scared. In front of them was no longer the usual gentle little brother, but a scary demon. His face changed dramatically, turning monstrous. His eyes turned blue and he grumbled like a demon. Because the husband knew his judgment was correct, he told his wife to stay at home to watch over his brother, while he ran to the next village to invite the shaman over to do an exorcism. Later, the husband and the shaman, who was known as the best shaman in the area, arrived at the house. The wife was standing outside and she said that she dare not go inside because he would go insane whenever he saw someone. With a thoughtful expression on his face after hearing the wife's explanation, the teacher went to observe the younger brother's situation. The husband was concerned and he was a little impatient to ask the shaman, but the shaman simply stated that his brother had died. When the wife heard it, she couldn't believe it. Why was her brother still able to move when he's dead? The shaman then asked the couple if they had recently seen a golden ferret around the house, which surprised him. After thinking for a while, the couple told the shaman that their brother had caught and killed a stray golden ferret in the yard last week. As soon as the shaman heard this, he asked the couple to bring him a pair of scissors. The wife immediately did as she was told. The husband then followed what the shaman told him, assisted his brother to stand up, and watched the shaman gently walk away to perform the spell. When confronted with the shaman, the younger brother was now screaming like a maniac. The shaman held the scissors in front of him and muttered an exorcism spell. Hearing the shaman's voice, the younger brother became more aggressive, turning around and shouting, baring his teeth to threaten the man. The strangest thing was that the younger brother did not speak any human language but only called out in unknown voices. Seeing this, the shaman became enraged and howled angrily, "If you don't go, I will cut off your tail." He was now struggling and screaming, making it difficult for the older brother to hold him. After that, as soon as the shaman finished the spell, he grabbed something invisible in the air and cut it in front of the couple with his scissors. As soon as the action ended, the younger brother groaned as if he was in pain. Following that, his entire body trembled, his face turned purple, but his eyes were gentle and calm. After that, the younger brother writhed in agony. After a while of shaking, he stopped moaning but fell to the ground. The couple saw this, immediately ran to him, but the younger brother was lying motionless. His body was cold, and he didn't wake up. Witnessing that scene, the shaman announced with a sad voice that the young brother was gone. Then he quietly left. Both husband and wife burst into tears as they looked at the cold corpse. His brother's funeral was held in an uncomplicated manner. But ever since, there had been a golden ferret with its tail missing, running back and forth in front of the couple's house. This story happened in my hometown many years ago. One year, a house burned down with valuable items incinerated by the flames. The villagers worked together to try and extinguish the fire, but unfortunately it was too late. The house that burned down belonged to a widow named Ling. The older woman lived alone and had a strange habit of talking to herself too much. After extinguishing the fire, the older woman was found burned to death in her house. There was a strong smell of burn everywhere. Everything was burned to ashes. But there was a strange thing: people did not find any signs of the fire at the corner of the house. The villagers came and saw a tablet on the table, but it was unclear what was written on it. Although the worship table had been burned to coal, that tablet was still intact, and the fire did not reach. There was a dead person in the house plus the strangeness of the worship tablet, so the villagers were afraid to get each other out. After that, the villagers buried the widow's body properly, while the house was abandoned for a long time. A few years later, a drunk man from the village passed by the house in the middle of the night. The man was half awake, half dreaming, when he heard a woman calling to him. He looked around to find out that the voice was coming from the widow's abandoned house. Thinking someone was inside, he also went in without hesitation. Suddenly, there was a voice of the woman asking him to take her out, and she would repay the favor. Although he couldn't see anyone, the man saw the worship tablet lying there. He had drunk a lot of alcohol that night, so he did not feel afraid when he knew that the worship tablet was talking to him. He picked up the tablet to look at it, and the voice inside the worship tablet came out again. The following day, while the man was sleeping, his wife woke him up with a morning song of scolding. The man woke up, bewildered, when he heard his wife ask about the worship tablet. He realized that he was holding a worship tablet in his hands. He didn't know how he brought it back, so he was surprised and scared. When he was about to throw it away, the worship tablet suddenly said, "Don't throw me. I will make you rich." The worship tablet also prophesied that there would be a severe drought the following year, telling the man to buy and save food and also sell it in the next year. After that, he would quickly become rich as long as he worshipped this tablet. Believing the worship tablet's words, the man began to look forward to next year's good fortune. Gritting his teeth to endure, the man borrowed money everywhere and hoarded a lot of food. He placed it at the solemn place in his house. The following year, indeed, the countryside experienced a severe drought, crop failure, and constant famine. The man quickly sold the food he had hoarded at many times the price and made a lot of money. He bought a few large tiled houses and lived a life of wealth that everyone admired. The tablet was also worshipped as a god, full of incense every day. One day the tablet prophesied again, telling him to bury all his possessions, hide all his money, and hide because tonight someone would come and try and arrest him. The man immediately followed suit, fleeing with the worship tablet. Yes, that night some robbers indeed broke into his house, but after searching for him they couldn't find anything of value. After a few days he and his wife returned home, and although their belongings were destroyed, their money was not lost. He was extremely grateful for the tablet, worshipping it day and night. In the end, the tablet said it could only help him 3 times, and 2 times had already passed. It asked him if he had any last wishes. The man thought for a while, seeing that he had a house and money, only lack of a beautiful woman because he thought his wife was too ugly. So he begged the worship tablet for a beautiful wife. That very night, as he was sleeping next to his wife, she did not change. Well, nothing had changed. She was still the same. He began to get impatient. He wanted to meet his beautiful wife, so he struggled to fall asleep, occasionally also glancing over at his wife. Every hour that passed, his wife changed her skin and gradually turned into a beautiful young person. The only thing was a big scar on her neck, like a cut. But he ignored that, proudly taking his wife down the street every day to show her off to everyone. 2 years later, while shopping together, the husband and wife met an older man who insisted that the man's wife was the older man's daughter. The man's parents and the wife's parents had both passed away, so having a stranger approach like that made him extremely angry. After asking, he found out that the older man's daughter died 2 years ago. This man's wife had the same appearance as the older man's daughter, so he got it wrong. The two felt that the older man was pitiful, so they later accepted the old man and wife as their parents took care of them. The following year, the man's wife gave birth to a fat baby boy, making everyone in the family happy. It was just that, well, the worship tablet never spoke again. The man didn't ask for anything either, but still regularly burned incense and prayed every day as a way to repay the favor. This is a true story which I had the opportunity to witness from beginning to end. Because this happened to my mother, not a stranger. One morning my father made breakfast for the whole family to eat because my mother was not feeling well. When my mom came out of the bedroom, her face was very haggard and worn out. I was worried, so I asked her what was wrong. She also made no secret of it. She said that she had a terrible nightmare in which a person appeared. Someone my mother didn't want to talk about. A man who died many years ago. This person was my uncle, Lou, who died of liver disease a few years ago. My mother dreamt of him subconsciously. She wondered why he was not dead and what he came to see her for. My uncle also said that he was not dead. He was currently locked in a coffin, so he could not go out, and told my mother to quickly ask my father to come and remove him from the coffin. My uncle said that he was just plain dead. That day, after waking up, he found himself locked in a coffin. He used all 10 fingers to scratch and scream, but no one listened and he could not get out. Then he held out 10 fingers to show my mother the pain he had to endure. He screamed in anger, his face turned into a devil, forcing my mother to go to see my aunt and release him. My mother was frightened by him and screamed loudly and sat up, out of that nightmare. My uncle was a bad person when he was still alive. Whenever he got drunk, he would beat my aunt mercilessly. He would break things and treated his siblings badly. So everyone in the family hated him, and my mother didn't know why she dreamt of him. After a while, she fell asleep again. Then she continued to dream of my uncle coming, and he begged her to tell my aunt to let him go. Just like that, my uncle made my mother toss and turn all night. She was unable to sleep. Dad told me to call my aunt to ask what was going on, but my mom didn't want that. She didn't want to talk to her then. Even stranger than that, one night when I got home from school, as soon as I entered through the door, I saw my aunt sitting on the sofa of the house. This time my aunt came without telling us first, which surprised me too. At this time the atmosphere in the house seemed quieter than usual. Everyone had sad expressions. I later found out that my aunt often dreamt of my uncle, dreams about resentment and mourning, and about him who had just died. Every time she dreamt of him, he cursed her. "Damn it! You hate me so much that you buried me alive!" He even strangled, tormented, threatened to kill my aunt if she didn't let him out. My aunt almost dreamt of him coming often. She also fell into a state of depression. She couldn't take it anymore. When my grandmother heard the news, she saw this and she decided to invite an exorcist. By using 7 peach wooden stakes, he stuck it onto my uncle's grave, sealing his soul for several years. My aunt never dreamt of my uncle since then, but she didn't expect my mother to dream of him coming back at all. My father was also very curious. Why didn't she open the grave to see if there was something wrong with him? A few days later, my aunt and my family went back to my hometown. We went to the uncle's grave to excavate. Everyone proceeded to open the coffin and everyone was anxiously waiting to see what was inside. The moment the coffin lid was opened, a whiff of white gas flew out of the coffin. No one could imagine my uncle lying in the coffin, reaching out his hand as if scratching the lid of the coffin. The tips of his fingers were almost crushed, looking painful before he died. There were also scratches on the coffin lid, and everyone could understand how helpless and desperate he must have been. Which meant my uncle could have been buried alive when he was just drunk and unconscious. And when he woke up, he tried to find a way out of the coffin. Finally, my uncle was indeed buried again. My mother had not dreamt of my uncle since then. Only my aunt sometimes dreams of him with great regret. When I was younger, my parents worked in big cities and did not return home all year, so I lived in a village with my grandmother and grandfather. They loved and spoiled me so much that I became obstinate. I often went out with 2 naughty boys who were in the same class as me at the time. Once they asked me to use our PE class to run into the forest and collect bird eggs. One of them climbed a tree in search of a bird's nest, while the rest of us waited below. After climbing the tree, he looked straight in one direction and kept staring. The other guy and I were waiting below, impatiently, so we urged them. "What are you doing for so long? We're getting impatient." He pointed to one direction and said, "I see someone hiding a treasure." Upon hearing this, the other boy and I ran up to another tree and climbed on it. I looked in the direction he indicated, and as expected, a woman burying a beautiful decorated box in a hole. The woman then covered the hole, knelt a few times to beg, and left. After the woman had gone, we went down from the trees to discuss what we were going to do. The boy in the green shirt proposed his idea, and the three of us agreed wholeheartedly. Because people in the village were unfamiliar with this type of burial, even cremation was uncommon. We had no idea what kind of box it was. That was all we could think of as we began digging up the box. The box was soon revealed. It was made of wood, carved with flowers all round and draped in a red cloth. The green shirt guy picked up the box and discovered it to be quite heavy. We were so excited that we ran all the way home with the box in our hands. My grandparents had to work all day, so the house was empty when the three of us entered. We were very excited to open the box and see what was inside. As soon as I opened the red cloth, I heard a shout from outside. It was our teacher's voice. The three of us were terrified and hastily hid the box under my bed. We climbed the backyard wall along the window, hoping to sneak out while the teacher knocked on the front door. As a result, when I poked my head out of the wall, I saw the PE teacher waiting for us beneath the wall. After being apprehended by the teacher, we were requested to invite our parents. I was chastised by my teacher all afternoon, and my grandfather picked me up at night. During dinner, I felt it was very cold in the house. After eating 2 small portions of rice, I got a headache and went to bed. That night I had a dream, or rather, a nightmare. A nightmare in which I was standing in the dark. A large house was not far away. I was so scared that all I wanted to do was get out of here as soon as possible. At this point, my friend who was in the green shirt walked right past me. With no soul eyes, he walked straight to the big house. I grabbed him and told him, "It's dangerous where you're going." But it didn't seem to work. He suddenly became very strong and shoved my hand away, and I couldn't imagine from where he got his strength. I followed him as he continued walking towards the house. As I approached, I noticed that there was no door and that the house was carved on all sides. He climbed on the carved flowers. He looked so horrifying, as if he was some kind of animal. He climbed to the top and then vanished. What the hell was going on? When I saw that, I dashed after him to catch up with him. When I got to the top, I looked down but couldn't see the bottom because it was pitch black. I looked down at the ground feeling extremely insecure. Right at this moment, I felt like there was a hand behind me pushing me. I screamed in terror as I fell completely into the abyss. I screamed and sat up only to realize that everything had been a nightmare. I was sweating profusely, feeling cold and dizzy. It was nearly 4 a.m. and it was still dark. I couldn't sleep any longer, so I hugged my pillow and knocked on my grandparents' room door. When my grandparents discovered that I had a fever, they gave me fever-reducing medicine and wrapped me in a blanket. I quickly fell asleep as a result of the drug's effect. I opened my eyes in a dream and saw that large house not far away. I was afraid, so I tried to turn around and run. As I was running, a figure darted past me like the wind. I took a closer look, and it was the boy in the green shirt, and I was not sure what he was doing here again. Then, as soon as I turned my head, the wall with the carvings appeared in front of me. The boy in the green shirt began climbing unconsciously as if he were being controlled like the last time. I looked up higher and there was a figure crawling on the wall. It was the other guy who had been waiting with me under the tree. I gritted my teeth and climbed up, even though I had no idea what I was doing. Just like the last time, there was an abyss on the other side of the wall, and I was not sure who pushed me down. But this time was different. I didn't regain consciousness and quickly collapsed. I smelled burning straw and looked around. The front and back were both dark, and the walls were grey. Not far away, I noticed 2 figures lying on the ground. They were my 2 friends. I quickly crawled to the green shirt guy and flipped him over. There was no facial contour on his face, only a large mass of flesh protruding in the middle with a large slit. I immediately broke out in a cold sweat, wondering what the hell this was. The large slit suddenly opened, revealing a massive eye. I was terrified. How did he become that way? I didn't dare to look at him, so I quickly turned my head, only to discover that the surrounding walls were all covered in big and small red eyes. And where I fell, now on the ceiling, were round eyes, each one staring at me fiercely. I rolled my eyes and fainted because everything happened all of a sudden. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the hospital with my grandparents looking at me with concern. But I didn't have the strength to ask for help. My throat was dry and I couldn't speak. I fell asleep again and couldn't wake up after a few seconds. This time when I opened my eyes, I was in the place full of eyes and my two friends had vanished. I was shivering in fear and losing my mind when I smelled the scent. I followed it and saw an open door. I crawled and rolled towards the door as if pleading for something. From behind, I heard a crackling sound and the floor became extremely hot. I didn't dare to look back. Instead, closing my eyes and running straight towards the door in a state of panic. I finally woke up when I stepped outside. I opened my eyes to find myself back at home lying in bed. The house was filled with incense smoke and an old man dressed as a shaman was holding a bunch of incense around me while reading something. After I recovered from my illness, my grandfather informed me that the box my friend and I dug up was a forbidden item belonging to someone else. My grandfather knew something was wrong when he took me to the hospital for treatment, so he invited the village shaman to come and see. He noticed something filthy in the house right away and discovered the box under the bed. After asking my two friends for directions to the location where we dug the treasure up, the shaman and my grandmother and grandfather buried the box once more and begged forgiveness. I was finally awake and healthy after the shaman blessed my house all day long. I'd become more obedient since then, because every time I wanted to be naughty, I imagined those eyes staring at me in that very nightmare. This is my tale from 2nd grade, when I used to hang out with my buddies to play. That day, the big guy in the group felt bored and proposed we play hide and seek together. We, of course, agreed. In our childhood, none of us wouldn't have been addicted to this game. Also, there was an unusual method for determining who is hiding and who is seeking. That was playing rock, paper, scissors to find out who would have to close their eyes first. I was unlucky to be the loser many times in that game. I was pouting. I didn't know how I could be that unlucky today. As soon as I turned to face the tree, I heard them rushing behind me, hoping they were hiding close so I could accomplish my job quickly. That was okay, even though I was the one who was punished. When I went seeking for them, I felt like a skilled detective. So being the seeker wasn't that terrible. I began counting from 1 to 10 to allow them to locate a spot to hide. I was pretty confident in this game. I spotted the fat guy in a few minutes. His enormous butt could not be hidden from me, and I swiftly caught him. All he could do was to poke his head out and laugh. I enjoyed playing with them since they were always extremely happy and never made me sad. I kept looking for the mushroom-headed guy, but there was a figure hiding behind the tree. Made me think it was him. I winked at the fat guy and told him to be quiet, then came and surprised the mushroom-head guy. I tiptoed, made a little and gentle steps closer to that black shadow. I wanted to scare him a bit to make him scream. I couldn't see the shadow's face well because of the big rock and the bush around. I placed a hand on the mushroom-headed guy's shoulder, but then I began to question, why did this guy have long hair? Was I mistaken? Before I could finish thinking, the individual turned to stare at me. A horror face shone up. It was an elderly woman with tangled hair, big eyes, and a huge mouth with barely a few teeth remaining. I was terrified, so I backed away and held. But she didn't seem to notice my reaction, and instead approached me and pulled out a bowl with a few filthy cakes inside, always calling me son. That scared the hell out of me even more, so I pushed the hands away and fled. The fat guy was scared too. He abandoned me and ran first. He was more scared than me. What a coward. Halfway through the run, the mushroom-headed guy rushed out of the bush and started laughing at us, calling us cowards. According to him, she was simply a crazy woman living on the outskirts of the woods, and there was nothing to be that scared about. Then I turned to look at her again. She was really a lunatic. She smiled at me and waved her hands to call me back to eat cakes. After being taunted by the mushroom head, I felt shame, so I blamed on that insane old woman and began cursing her. We then picked up stones from the ground and hurled them at her, expressing our rage for being branded cowards earlier. Finally, we teased her with nasty remarks. We drew back once we had satisfied our enjoyment, leaving her on the ground and injured all over. Her expression was sorrowful. People said that her husband and child had both died. The shock had left her mentally unsettled, driving her insane till now. And at the time I had no idea that the vandalism had resulted in a remarkable conclusion, with me nearly losing my life. I returned home after a hard outing to have dinner with my family. I was too exhausted, so I ate a lot. My father was curious about what I did today because my clothes were all muddied. I had no intention of concealing anything to my father, so I told him how I met the strange woman in the woods and teased her a little. As soon as I finished, my father paused briefly. He was silent for a few moments, and then simply ordered me not to do anything to her again and to keep away from her. Because my father didn't chastise me, I just let it go afterward and kept eating without recalling what he just told me. Something weird happened to me that night. I closed my eyes for a while and fell asleep since I was too weary from playing during the day. I had just had a brief snooze when I noticed the temperature in the room steadily dropping, making me incredibly chill, as if I were in a fridge. Despite the fact that my eyes were still closed and dreamy, I had the impression that someone was staring at me from outside the window. Then, as though someone was hanging to the door, hands clutching to the glass began to emerge. In my ears, the creaking noises of crawling on the glass began to sound like whispering. The sound was clearer and clearer, sounded like that thing was moving closer to me. My eyes were so heavy that I couldn't open them, but I could feel it. Then I tried to open my eyes a little so I could peek out the window and see what was going on. Those handprints had made their way into my room. It crept up behind me, climbing over the table I placed beside the windows, leaving little handprints as black as coal all over the window and table. I panicked. I was ready to scream, and when I realized my body was immobile, rigid enough that I couldn't move, as a result, I just laid down there watching the handprints slowly creep towards me, onto the bed and all over my body. My heart hammering like it was about to burst, but there was nothing I could do. I could feel it, that monster slithering behind me on the empty space. A shiver went down my spine. My body remained motionless, but the object was crawling into my blanket and moving closer to my face. At the moment, all I wanted to do was scream loudly so that my parents could hear and rush to my aid, but there was no way to assist me in opening my mouth. All of a sudden, my body felt relaxed, as if I had broken down a barrier, and I felt like I could move. Before I could celebrate or scream, I saw it. A baby with a very big figure, and blood-red eyes filled with rage that had been crawling on my bed. I felt like spirited away as soon as I saw it. I was so terrified that I couldn't flee or scream anymore. I began to feel empty, as if my head was floating in the clouds. I couldn't recall anything anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a high fever that wouldn't go away. A doctor from the village came to check me. He didn't say anything about the disease after witnessing it, but simply scowled and frowned. He seemed to understand why I became so ill. Then he turned to face my parents and inquire whether I'd experienced anything unusual or met someone unusual recently. He believed I was haunted. When my parents heard this, they both glanced at each other as though they recalled me making fun of the insane old woman the day before. My mother didn't mention how I had been cured after. She simply informed me that the year my family went to see that old mad woman together with the doctor. My village is a small piece of land with a few dozen houses, located next to a large dense forest, and a very few people come here. No one in my village knows when this forest existed, and no one dares to set foot in it. Since long time, no wild animals have appeared in this forest, only towering old trees standing side by side. However, the reason this forest has become such a dangerous obsession in my village is that no one has ever set foot in it that ever came back. Considering the story of a cousin in my family, despite the fact that he was lost in the forest and that many people in the village were looking for him, it has been a few years and there have been negative results. One day my best friend invited me to his house to watch a movie while his parents were away. We sat on the couch in the living room all night, watching horror movies. The spooky scenes created a tense atmosphere. I used to be a coward, so whenever a horror scene appeared on TV, I would jump and scream in terror. My friend Quing, seeing that I was a coward, made fun of me right away, eager to have an excuse to stay up all night tonight. I was mocked, which made me angry. I howled at my two friends, attempting to demonstrate that I was not as shy as they claim. But Quing didn't think that was enough, so he took out a mid-denomination bill and placed it on the table in front of us, calling it a bet. The game would be a bet to see who dared to take a walk around my village's famous forbidden forest. Because of the aggressiveness, my other friend and I both agreed to bet. Everyone put money on the table, and whoever would win could keep all the money. We were confidently walking to the front of the jungle, unaware of the horror that was waiting for us inside. King was the game's instigator, so he volunteered to take the lead inside. I stood outside staring at his arrogant demeanor, but on the inside, I was feeling extremely uneasy. My friend and I stood huddled together to keep warm, watching Quing rushed inside and vanished in front of us. But it wasn't long before a young man figure emerged from the forest, hurrying from the inside out, looking desperate. I asked my other friend, who was skeptical, if it was our friend Quing. We were certain it was Quing until the figure in the forest became clearer. But seeing his attitude at the time piqued our interest even more. Quing ran until he couldn't breathe, as if he was being pursued by something terrifying behind him, his face still displaying his extreme fear. Quing appeared to fall to the ground at the edge of the forest. We had to hold him with our hands before he could stand, but he mumbled something very frightening. We kept asking Quing what happened in that forest, but it took him a long time to regain his composure and told us about what happened inside the forest. He claimed that there was a terrifying monster inside, and that as soon as he saw it, it rushed to him until out there. But when I looked back, there was no one behind King, which led me to believe that he made up stories to deceive us in order to win all the bets so we didn't believe it. It took the initiatives to venture deep into the forest, proving Quing's claim that he was more cowardly than me. But this time Quing repeatedly stopped me, not only refusing to let me in but also agreed to give me all the bets if I went out. I began to feel a little uneasy in my heart at this point, but the entire forest seemed to have some kind of magic that kept urging me to go deeper inside. I took my time walking inside, carefully inspecting my surroundings. I picked up a broken wooden stick lying on the ground as a defense for myself. I took a deep breath and started to walk along the path in front of me. Despite the fact that the two sides of the forest always gave off dark and cold winds, I became intrigued by the scene inside this mysterious forest, but the deeper I went, the quieter the forest became, making me shiver. I was about to turn around at the end when I was drawn in by the rustling sound next to me. I immediately turned my head to look, and there was a strange but very large man walking towards me. This man's face and figure became more visible in the darkness right in front of me. I took a step back to protect myself, holding the wooden stick firmly in my hand just in case of the worst scenario. I kept asking who the man in front of me was, but the other person flatly refused to answer. When the mysterious person was only a few inches away, I was shocked to realize it was my family's long-lost relative. This man did not respond to my question. Instead, he showed a devilish face with 2 lines of bright red blood running down the corners of his mouth. I didn't have time to process what was going on, but the current horror moment gave me a definite answer that I had encountered a monster, just as Quing had said earlier. This strange monster had a human-like body, but was much larger, and its legs resembled those of a wolf, complete with terrifying black sharp claws. His body was also covered in hair, and his skin sagged, as if only the outer skin covered the bones within. It reached out its hands and approached me where I was standing as if to grab me, leaving me terrified and speechless. I could only raise the wooden stick as a weapon for self-defense. I turned my head and ran away, screaming loudly as I ran, waiting for the monster to let down its guard. But the monster in the back would not let me leave. It kept chasing me to the outside while staggered with its head as if it wanted to separate from its body. I wasn't sure what mystical power this monster had that allowed it to run so fast, but I could hear his footsteps getting closer and closer to where I was standing. He abruptly reached out and grabbed my shoulder. I could feel the cold from my body mixed with the smell of decomposing flesh, making me nauseous and scared, as if I wanted to die again and again. Because there was no other option, I turned around, used all my strength, grabbed the wooden stick and smacked the monster's head hard. My unexpected blow rendered the monster defenseless, causing it to stagger for a few seconds before immobilizing. I took advantage of the brief moment of the opportunity, sprinting towards the forest's edge in an attempt to flee. But the further I ran, the more I felt like I was lost in a maze, as this monster appeared everywhere around me. They stood everywhere, behind the towering trees, lustfully looking at me. I tried to run, and after a few steps I arrived at a safe location where I met 2 friends who were waiting for me. In fear, I rushed to my 2 friends to look for help. I told my friends that I was being pursued by monsters in the deep forest. When they saw my panicked appearance, they grabbed a nearby tree and looked into the depths of the forest. But when I and the others returned, the entire forest was empty, and I had no idea when those monsters vanished. We decided to call the cops because we were so terrified. A few minutes later, the police arrived and accompanied us to the forest to search. The cops went deep inside and discovered the wooden stick I was holding earlier, embedded in a tree right where I fought off the monster. But after searching for a long time and failing to find any more clues, we were reprimanded by the cop, He considered that we were hallucinating because we had consumed too much alcohol. Only later, I realized that this scary forest was set up to lure curious, oblivious people like me inside as prey for a scary monster. The story occurred in a river which ran through my village. People frequently drowned in the area due to the vast and deep currents. At the time, there was a family who stood by the river, all with sad expressions, looking at the water and lamenting. The reason was that their son drowned while bathing in the river, so they sought the assistance of Mr. Kang, who specialized in retrieving dead bodies from the river. Because it has been many hours with no results, the deceased family was concerned. All of a sudden, at the precise moment, the man pointed to the water and exclaimed loudly, "Come back! Come back!" With their expectant eyes, the three-person family looked down at the river. They saw Mr. Kang and his wooden boat. Mr. Kang, who had a shabby and austere face, worked as a boatman on the river as well as a body picker. The victim's family was very worried and anxiously waited for Mr. Kang's wooden boat to arrive. The boat approached the shore slowly. The river was now rising, so the boat swayed, and Mr. Kang had to work hard to keep the boat afloat. Next, Mr. Kang quickly rowed to shore. When Mr. Kang's boat docked, the victim's three family members looked at the wooden boat, worried, and the mother's face was sad. There was nothing in the dug-out canoe but a fishing net. With tears in her eyes, the mother asked Mr. Kang if he could retrieve her son's body, her voice filled with pain. Mr. Kang did not respond, instead quietly raising his wrist, which had a rope attached to it. He stretched one end of the rope into the water while the other appeared to be tied to a heavy object, and he was attempting to pull it. Mr. Kang's face became dull and solemn. He still did not open his mouth to speak, but his gaze was fixed on the river's surface. When Mr. Kang pulled the rope out of the water, a white corpse's arm was pulled out with it, shocking everyone. It turned out that Mr. Kang tied the body with a rope and dragged him to the shore. According to locals here, drowning people should not be put on the boat because it would be very unlucky. Mr. Kang remained silent as he brought the body ashore. He then turned around and returned to the boat. As the mother witnessed the pitiful scene unfolding in front of her eyes, she sobbed and screamed as she gazed at her son's corpse. Mr. Kang was used to such scenes, and he rowed away calmly. Mr. Kang's boat was about to leave the dock when a man reached out and called out to him. "Mr. Kang, wait!" The man presented Mr. Kang with a large sum of money in exchange for Mr. Kang retrieving their son's body. Mr. Kang, on the other hand, refused the money and sailed away. "I'm not doing this for the money. Take care of your son's funeral well. I'm leaving." Mr. Kang did not despise money. Rather, a heartbreaking incident in his past had changed his mind. Previously, Mr. Kang had both rowed and caught fish in the river. If there was any dead body floating in the river, Mr. Kang would also pick it up to take advantage of some extra money. The story took place 5 years ago. Only Mr. Kang was famous for picking up dead bodies in the river. When the body of the victim was discovered, Mr. Kang did not immediately hand it over to the victim's family, instead allowing them to kneel and beg on the shore. Because the poor couple did not have enough money to pay Mr. Kang, they prayed and pleaded with him to reduce the price to allow them to receive their son's body. so Mr. Kang thought for a while and then lowered the price. However, the price was still too high in comparison to the poor couple's family, so the old woman cried out and begged Mr. Kang to be merciful and reduce the money for them. When confronted with the situation, the old man cried out and said,
"I beg you, we will pay you a little in advance. The rest we will borrow and pay you later."
Having said that, both the old couple continued to bow their heads to Mr. Kang, who was still holding the rope to hang their son's body and considering the old man's suggestion. Mr. Kang then agreed to accept the money and delivered the body to the old couple for them to bring it back. Mr. Kang's wife died young, and the family had a daughter who married as well. Because she was concerned that her father would be alone, she would come home every weekend and took advantage of making a delicious meal for Mr. Kang. Today, having a good amount of money, Mr. Kang happily bought wine and meat ready for a delicious meal with his dear daughter. He handed his daughter the large piece of pork he was holding in his hand and told her to make the casserole. Mr. Kang's daughter was now his only source of comfort. He was overjoyed that his daughter still came here to cook for him on a regular basis. Previously, the daughter had opposed Mr. Kang's drinking, but today she not only cooked a delicious meal, but she also bought her father a bottle of good wine. Father and daughter had dinner together and told each other many amusing stories. Mr. Kang then pondered and asked his daughter, "Is there anything you want to tell, Dad?" Mr. Kang's daughter just said that she was very happy because he was always healthy and happy, but she wanted to say something that she always kept in her heart. It turned out that the daughter was always opposed to her father doing the job of picking up dead bodies for wages. The villagers claimed that Mr. Kang was dishonest when he took advantage of the unscrupulous job to make money. Mr. Kang raised his face before his daughter finished speaking. He used to hear people whispering behind his back saying such things, but now even his daughter was opposed to his work. His wife died young, and he had to do everything he could to earn money to raise her. Mr. Kang didn't care what other people said, but today, hearing his daughter say that, he felt disappointed. Mr. Kang immediately stood up, enraged, and scolded his daughter for failing to sympathize with him. Mr. Kang walked out angrily after arguing with his daughter, refusing to look back even though his daughter was calling him. Mr. Kang was extremely frustrated at the time, and even his own daughter looked down on him. Mr. Kang had only taken a few steps outside when it began to rain. He felt as if God was against him. Mr. Kang walked back to the shack where he used to rest by the river in the rain. He lay in the shack with wet clothes, huddled up, and it showed that Mr. Kang was very cold and sad. He couldn't help but cry when he thought about everything that had happened and how much bitterness he had suffered. It kept raining continuously. Mr. Kang had no idea when he fell asleep. All of a sudden he vaguely heard the sound of rain outside the shack, mixed with his daughter's voice calling him. He got to his feet and looked outside where he saw his daughter standing in the rain calling to him. Mr. Kang ignored his anger when he saw his daughter soaking in the rain. Fearing that his daughter would catch a cold from the rain, he quickly ran out of the shack. Mr. Kang looked at his daughter as she stood outside in the rain, knowing how much his heart ached. It was just that his daughter's behavior was a bit strange. She begged Mr. Kang to forgive her for her words earlier, and in the end she said she had to go away, so she came to see him one last time. Mr. Kang found it difficult to understand where his daughter was going as a result of these words. He was being hesitant when his daughter turned around and walked into the river. Mr. Kang rushed forward to stop her, but what he didn't expect was that his hand had already passed over his daughter's body. His hands were shaking. Standing dumbfounded, he kept calling his daughter's name. A hunch told him that his daughter had an accident and tried to come back here to see him. Mr. Kang sadly called out his daughter's name, but to no avail. The daughter went to the cold river bank. The father's heartbreaking scream was drowned out by the sound of rain, making the pain of losing a child almost interminable. From the moment Mr. Kang walked out, the daughter went along the river to find her father, but unfortunately fell into the river and drowned. From then on, Mr. Kang rowed on the river to help retrieve the dead body and didn't take a penny. Last year, my younger brother Shinichi and I went to my wife's hometown to visit her parents, but unfortunately the town was forced to close due to the epidemic, so we were stuck. I went fishing with my brother. The lake was located on the south side of the town. I heard that this lake used to be used for fish farming, but it had recently become an abandoned one. Shinichi and I decided to fish here that day because it was located far away from people's houses, undetected by anyone. Fishing took patience, but once you caught a fish, you were always as happy as the New Year's party, so we spent the afternoon fishing all day. We were so immersed in fishing that we forgot the time. Before I knew it, it was already past the afternoon and the sky was getting darker. We had a good harvest that afternoon, but I still didn't want to go home. I wanted to stay and fish a little longer. When I glanced into the distance under the reflection of the water, I vaguely saw two people standing in front of the house next to the lake. Because of the epidemic, no one came here but us. I didn't even see a single person pass by all day. When I suddenly saw someone standing on the dam, I unconsciously turned my head in that direction, wondering if they were the keepers of the lake. But when I looked back, I saw that the top of the dam was empty. The thing confused me a bit. Shinichi saw that I was looking at the top of the dam in confusion, so he also looked up, but unfortunately, we couldn't see anything. After hearing what I said, he once again glanced into the direction, and then confirming that there was nothing important, he didn't care anymore and continued fishing. I started staring at the fish again, but for some reason, I always felt a pair of eyes staring at me from the side of the house on the dam. As if something urged me on, I couldn't help but look back. As I looked back, there was no one there but the dark old house. I took a closer look at the house and thought to myself that maybe there was a man in the old house, but because it was so dark inside, I couldn't see anything at all. I didn't care much about this. But then I looked again at something floating in the water. As we waited for the fish to bite, Shinichi caught another one. At first I was happy, but in my heart I always felt nervous and worried about something. This time I didn't look back at the actual house's picture, but looked at its reflection in the water. The moment I looked at the water and saw a shadow, I got so scared that I almost threw my fishing rod into the water. I did see a figure in front of the house. It was a man, not standing in front of the house, but hanging from the upper beam. I didn't know if it was the wind blowing, but his whole body was swaying slightly. Seeing this, I was so scared and I broke out in a cold sweat. I suddenly turned around and was looking for the fishing rod in my hand that I had just dropped. Shinichi also noticed my reaction. There was an inexplicable surprise on his face as he looked at me and followed my gaze to the house on the dam. In that moment I understood that something was indeed wrong. I couldn't tell what it was either. Shinichi seemed to realize something as he looked at the house too. He didn't say another word, but his face changed, just like mine. Shinichi gradually understood the seriousness of the matter, and we both quickly packed up and left. As soon as we left the fish pond, we hurriedly started the car, and during the ride neither of us spoke and the atmosphere was a bit tense. But at this point, I was still shivering. On the way back, we had to pass a few abandoned houses adjacent to the dam. We both had mixed feelings about what happened, really scared about what we had seen. We finally passed the house. We both couldn't control ourselves and looked at it one more time. It was old, mossy, empty, and very creepy. As we passed, the lights from the headlights of our cars shone on the dilapidated house. The inside of the house was empty. There was no sign of living people. It was strange. We decided quickly to return home. After confirming that there was no one in that house, the atmosphere in the car calmed down a bit. When we got home, we talked about this. I also talked with my wife and her parents. I heard that the fish pond had been lying empty for more than 10 years. And the reason that that house was abandoned was also a scary thing. Long ago, there was a couple who were leased out by the state to this fish pond. And after that, they spent all their money investing in fish farming. However, some children in the town had sneaked out there to steal fish. Then, because of insulting and scolding these children, the couple was harmed by people. The people even poisoned their fish dam and killed all of the fish. When the couple went to confront the perpetrator, he attacked the husband violently and broke his leg. So not only did all the fish in the pond disappear, but also they had no money for medical treatment. Tragedy struck. The husband couldn't stand, resentful and miserable, so he drank pesticides and committed suicide. At the time, the wife was too heartbroken to go on. She did not have time to think, so she hanged herself on the rafters next to the dam. Since then, some spiritual things have happened regularly in this place. Many people who passed by this lake at night would see them or hear their cries and lamentations. To this very day, the fish pond was no longer contracted, so it was left alone and became a deserted lake. After hearing the story, I was upset and felt sorry for the couple, but I was also a little worried. After all, the fish we caught were also released back into the wild. The story that I'm about to tell you is from my personal experience, and even though I don't remember all the details, it is 100% truth. My hometown is in the northwest and it's close to the desert, so it's located in a sandy place where the weather was windy all year round. For me and the people who lived here, there was always a lot of fun to be had and a lot of connection to the place. Moreover, in this desert area, there were many jujube trees, and usually in the fall we would go to pick the jujubes to eat. Today's story, I will tell you about my cousin. At the time she was only 21 or 22 years old, but had just gotten engaged not long ago. She was an easygoing person, so every time she took me out to pick jujubes and play sandboarding, it was fun. At the time I was wandering around when suddenly I saw something black buried in the golden sand, and because the sun reflected the light, we couldn't see anything at the moment. It wasn't until we got closer that we used a stick to pick it up and saw that it was a cool-looking pair of sunglasses. Later, when we found out that the item was still new, undamaged, and usable, my cousin saw it and brought it home to use. It was surprising that when she took the glasses back home, it didn't give her anything good. Instead, many bad things would happen to my cousin. When she got home, she became ill, and every day she had a high fever and kept lying in such a coma that she could not get out of bed, and the bed she had been lying in for days. At first, her family simply thought it was a common cold. They decided to get some medicine and go see some doctors for advice. As they went home to take care of her, everyone's anxiety slowly subsided because my sister's eyes couldn't be opened for some reason. The family couldn't do anything at all, so they took her to a large country hospital for examination, but even there, they found no abnormal health problems. At that time, the doctor prescribed her some eye drops and some anti-inflammatory things, but these drugs basically did not work at all, even though they used them for days. It seemed that her eyes could only be opened by a small slit, and everyone knew that she used to have big round eyes and double eyelids, but her eyes were then crossed and it had changed a lot more than before. Furthermore, my cousin's eyes were also very scared when she saw the light, and she always said that it was very bright and blinding. She also mentioned seeing some shadowy figures floating in front of her eyes at night. But when she looked closely, she wouldn't be able to see anything. After some time, she still had to go to work and became really afraid of the light, so she had to wear sunglasses every day before going out. My cousin became very dependent on these sunglasses. In recent times, she still regularly went to several hospitals for examinations, but they still did not see any unusual health problems. One of my family aunts was very superstitious, so a few months later, as my aunt saw no improvement in my cousin, she immediately went to ask a famous clairvoyant in the locality for help. It was known that this clairvoyant was very famous, and people in the city often believed and often came there to invite her to come and help them and see the future. Very often, she did not even take money for it, but they could pay in other ways. They could pay by giving her incense, cake, or fruit. After hearing from my aunt about the clairvoyant, she took my cousin there to see how it was. About 5 o'clock the next morning, the aunt took the cousin to the clairvoyant to worship, light incense, and then enter the door. Usually before starting a ceremony, the clairvoyant would burn incense to worship a god on the altar first, which had become a long-standing custom. Because it was early in the morning and dark, my cousin didn't wear her sunglasses. First of all, let's talk a little bit more about the clairvoyant. She only worshipped a statue of a god covered with yellow cloth on top, and before entering she would often say a lot of prayers to ask the gods for help. And then she suddenly sat silent in front of the goddess statue. Onlookers also discussed that she was probably being possessed by the invisible. She sat there for a while, and then surrounding space became extremely quiet. After 10 minutes or so, she would start swaying constantly, expressing and changing both her personality and tone to the point of becoming a completely different person. This clairvoyant turned her head to look at my cousin for a long time, and even the good expression that were unique to her disappeared. My cousin was scared and amazed by the atmosphere and the state of the old woman at this time. She also asked her if she had taken someone's things without asking. My cousin did not know how to answer because she did not understand what the clairvoyant was saying. But the more she spoke, the more specific she became, and her words flashed through my cousin's mind like a flash of lightning. My cousin reacted and learned that this could be due to the sunglasses she picked up earlier. During the conversation, my cousin took out the pair of sunglasses from her pocket and showed them to the clairvoyant, and as soon as she saw them, she told them that this object was so dense that it made my cousin sick. Later, my cousin told me about the day when she and I went out together and saw a pair of sunglasses on the golden sand. She did pick them up and tried them on. The clairvoyant, after listening, did not say anything else and immediately suggested that they went to the golden sand to find the owner of these glasses. From there, she would come up with some ideas to solve the problem and help them. At dawn the next morning, my aunt and cousin searched all day and finally found it. At the time, there was a corpse buried under the golden sand. It looked like the person was dead for a long time. When they got home, they called the police to report the crime. Then they followed the methods. The clairvoyant told them of burning some banknotes at the intersection, as well as burning sunglasses. Then my cousin's eyes really improved, and she was no longer afraid of the light suddenly. But she was still slightly squinting to this very day. It is said that what the dead have used will leave a mark on the living, and the living is best not to use it. That is the reason why if someone in the family dies, they should be burning the clothes they've used all their life, even the most precious things, or bury it with them. It began in a small northeastern mountainous village where old marriage practices were still in existence. Sumi was a beautiful girl who was blessed with great talents. Needless to say, the girl always got involved with the village men flirting with her, but they all shook their heads in boredom and quit as soon as they heard about the bride token. Those who wanted to marry the girl must be born from a wealthy and noble family. Only that way could they get the nod of approval. The bride token was up to 20 ounces of gold. Jiro, a young man who came from a deprived background, was told he'd never have the chance to marry the girl. In the village, there was also a young man named Kento who was head over heels in love with Sumi. This man was not poor at all, but since the bride price was so expensive, everybody told him to give up. Despite being advised by his friends, the man still became agitated and walked away as they didn't support him marrying Sumi. In order to have Sumi, Kento made a promise to himself that he would get rich. He did everything to build relationships and make friends in high places. Now, as Kento had made a fortune for himself, he utilized his relationships to blind the ones in power as he contracted the wild mountainous area which was located 30 kilometers away from his village. Ever since that day, large trucks were seen consecutively commuting to the area on a daily basis as they exploited the soil, stone and wood to depletion. After 3 years of being involved in illegal activities, the man eventually became affluent. Kento couldn't be more confident upon the day he returned home. He quickly went to see his friends, asking about Sumi. Kento told them that he had become a billionaire. Since money was no longer an issue, he returned to propose to Sumi. His friends immediately said the bride token had been 5 times bigger compared to that 3 years ago. But the calm expression was still on his face as he showed them a thick cowhide bag while letting out a smirk. About Jiro, the poor guy. After a long period of time of hard work, the man ended up saving a great amount of money to marry Sumi. However, Sumi's mother bluntly refused, saying that it was the story of 3 years ago, and now as her daughter was in the age of getting married, considering how many families wanted to have her as their daughter-in-law, this amount of money Jiro had was inadequate. The woman didn't even let him finish his 3rd sentence as she kicked him out of the house and threw his money onto the ground. Not knowing what to do, Jiro picked up each and every precious coin then left. He couldn't hide the sorrow on his face. At that time, Jiro was still hoping that he would marry Sumi, but the thought instantly faded away when he saw Kento approaching Sumi's house. The man couldn't do anything under the circumstances, neither did he have any money nor power to get in Kento's way. And what goes around comes around. Kento paid the bride wealth to the family and finally had Sumi as his wife. A couple of days later, fireworks went off as a grand wedding took place. The whole village was prevailed with an uproarious atmosphere. Cars were placed bumper to bumper, while everyone was eager to witness the wedding of the rich. According to traditional conceptions, children must be completely obedient to their parents, thus Sumi had to obey them. She reluctantly married Kento. After the grand wedding to Sumi, marriage life was truly a hell on earth. Kento unexpectedly turned out to be a brute. Since Sumi was always in a gloomy mood, she often got beaten by Kento, but the woman couldn't do anything but held her tears and suffered. One day as Sumi returned home from the market, she encountered Jiro. At that moment she could only greet him from afar, then continued to go home. Unfortunately, her actions were seen by her husband, Kento. Being filled up with jealousy, the man intended to harm Jiro. That afternoon, Kento went to see Jiro and offered him a job at his quarry. Jiro immediately agreed and rejoiced as he was in need of earning money to pay his way. 2 days into Jiro's work at the quarry, many police cars were seen passing through the village. According to the 2 workers who worked at the quarry, they coincidentally found out a corpse after their shift. The 2 were frightened, as occupational accidents often happened at this mine. The dead man was believed to fall from a mountain slope and had his body pierced with a sharp rock. One side of the face was completely deformed, but one could still recognize it and knew that it was Jiro. Having no relatives, Jiro had his funeral conducted poorly while his body was buried in the forest. That day after Jiro's funeral, Kento quickly returned home. The man panicked as soon as he opened the door. There was a figure of a man appearing before his eyes as it slowly walked into his house. The shadow also looked identical to that of Jiro. It suddenly vanished after Kento rubbed his eyes. He took a deep breath, then carefully walked into the house. Kento asked his wife if she saw anyone coming in, but she merely shook her head and said no. The man stayed up through the whole night as he was filled with great fear. As the night progressed, he could not sleep as he felt guilty with the horrific crimes he had done. The next morning, Kento brought a lot of money to a shaman in the village, asking for help. The shaman didn't care about anything but money. He told Kento to use dog blood and spill it on Jiro's grave. Only after using it would the calamity be over. Dog blood would trap Jiro's soul, making it unable to escape from the grave. Kento immediately went to a dog slaughterhouse to buy blood. The owner brought out a bucket that was filled with dog blood to Kento. After getting what he needed, the brutal murderer went into the forest, searching for the spot where Jiro was buried. Without hesitation, he poured the bucket of blood over Jiro's grave, causing it to be covered in red. Kento didn't even have a twitch of guilt as he put on a sadistic smile. The blood spread all over the grave and then absorbed into the sand. In no time, the grave was completely covered with blood. Afterwards, the man calmly returned home. Despite having committed another crime, Kento felt no remorse as he acted like nothing had happened. That night, the man could finally sleep well. As it struck midnight, Kento suddenly felt like there was something like a hand touching his face. All of a sudden, the room was filled with a stench which awoken him instantly. But as soon as he got up, he was scared to death by the thing he saw as he screamed in panic. The man gasped in horror, seeing the horrific scene right next to him. It was not Sumi who was lying next to him. Instead, it was Jiro, with a creepy looking face that was badly deformed. Jiro's face was covered with blood. He looked at Kento whilst putting on a ghostly smile. Kento tried to regain his composure. He rubbed his eyes constantly and then saw Sumi's face again. Seeing the scared and anxious look on Kento's face, Sumi wondered what had happened to him. Kento recounted the scary incident to Sumi, but she seemingly didn't believe it, as she thought it was probably him having nightmares, hence ignoring him and continuing with her sleep. Kento really wanted to have an explanation, but was soon afraid that Sumi would find out he was the one that killed Jiro. Unable to share with anyone, Kento went out for a walk to reassure himself. However, As the man was still in bewilderment, a series of bizarre things continued to happen in the restroom. As Kento was smoking cigarettes, he suddenly noticed a shadow passing by the wall, which instantly caught his attention. As the man looked up, he was startled by the thing in front of him as he let out a fierce scream. Out of nowhere, a demon covered in blood appeared on the stone wall. It rushed towards Kento while reaching his hands to him. Having no time to think, Kento pulled up his pants and ran for his life. The blood-covered demon turned its gaze at Kento. It seemed like it was Jiro who had transformed into a devil to take revenge on him. Hearing the scream outside, Sumi got out of bed and rushed outside to check, only to find out that Kento was gripped by fear. Kento told his wife that there was a demon chasing him, but when Sumi looked around, there was no one in sight. Sumi had a premonition that her husband was trying to hide something. She asked Kento if he had committed any wrongdoing. The utter silence took over the place. Kento didn't burst a single word, then stumbled into the house. Ever since that night, there wasn't a day gone by without Kento feeling insecure and anxious. The man had an impression that the demon was still there, watching his every move. Feeling scared, Kento locked himself in the room, not eating anything, and soon became emaciated. Being haunted with his sins, Kento was always in a state of fear, which gradually drove him crazy. Being unable to put up with misery, Sumi made an escape, eventually freeing herself from a brutal husband. It was not until a year later that Kento appeared at the police station. The man gave himself up to the police as he admitted all the crimes he had committed and confessed it was him who pushed Jiro off the cliff. About Sumi, she moved to the city a few years later and got engaged with a man whose face was identical with that of Jiro.